Sensory issues. We had a great presentation by an occupational therapist yesterday talking about sensory issues. And let's see if we can get a few more of these things, elements on the screen here. There it is. Now, occupational therapists look at senses. One way to look at them are inner and outer senses. The outer senses of touch, taste, hearing, and smell, we learned those in grade school. There's a number of inner senses. And the two we'll look at are the vestibular, that helps you keep your balance. The proprioceptive tells you where your body parts are in space and how much force to use to accomplish a task. So how does that work? As you're sitting here, everybody touch the back of their chair. How many of you had to turn around and look to find the back of your chair, or did you just know where it was? That's proprioception for you. Where your body parts are in space. Where the body ends, where the environment begins. And many people on the autism spectrum have difficulty knowing where the body ends and where the environment begins. And that's why you see many people with autism who may seem like really clumsy, a bull in a china shop, for example. That's why you see children with autism, for example, slouching in their chairs and it looks like they're going to slide under their desk. That was another area of proprioception that we take for granted. And I see most of you engaging in that right now, as we speak. How many of you take it for granted, you know, just how hard to hold your pen and how far to push it around to take notes? But for many of us on the autism spectrum, that requires a lot of concentration. So much so that there isn't any room to think about or concentrate on anything else. So these are some of the challenges that we face on the autism spectrum. And what happens is something's overwhelm one or more of the senses and create what I call sensory violations. Something that overwhelms one or more of the senses. How do we deal with these sensory violations? What do we do in order to accommodate for them or work around them? Let's take a look at this video clip from my DVD, Living Along the Autism Spectrum, where I talk about what life is like on this side of the autism spectrum. Wow, that thing disappeared and I didn't do anything. Well, there it is.
Tell me what autism Asperger's means to you today.
Today, to me it means a different way of being. Not necessarily a disordered way of being, but a different way of being.
How? How are you different?
Well, for example, part of the autism spectrum involves sensory issues, sensory sensitivities. So I may be more sensitive to certain sounds, visual stimuli, tactile stimuli, and so on. So, for example, to me it means that I need to wear loose clothing as opposed to tight clothing.
Why?
Because the sensation is just too strong if I wear tight clothing. It means, for example, that I have a beard and can only manage to shave small portions of my face because shaving feels like a power sander scraping against my skin. So that's what I mean by a different way of being, as opposed to a disordered way of being. I found ways to accommodate for my challenges.
So accommodating for sensory issues. And one way I accommodate is, well, if I don't engage in careers that involve wearing a suit and tie, then I'll be okay. Where there are other people on the spectrum I know who crave this kind of pressure that they get from tight clothing, from binding clothing. They need that sensory input. So it's individual to the person. And part of dealing with sensory issues is learning how to live with them. Live with the ones that exist. So I found some ways to work around them. There's other sensory issues as well, such as lighting. Many people with autism perceive fluorescent lights like most others perceive a strobe light. Now, a strobe light is fun on a holiday, but it does a real number on your productivity at school and at home. And for many children, being in a room with fluorescent lights is like being in a room with a strobe light, and just nothing's going to get done. Another type of lighting which is really difficult is what is known as downlights. Lights that are embedded or recessed into the ceiling. So I have a little thing I have to say about that, which we'll watch right about now. I'm Stephen Shore, and I just have a brief message about sensory issues. One common sensory challenge that those of us on the autism spectrum face is dealing with downlights. Now, downlights are those lights that look like they're in a coffee can in the ceiling, and they shine down and really create a bit of a whiteout sensation, a painful sensation in the eyes. And that's one reason why you'll see many people on the autism spectrum wearing a baseball cap like this when they have to sit under fluorescent lights or under lights, under downlights. So hence the ubiquitous baseball cap. And you'll see many of us on the autism spectrum wearing these caps for that very reason, which also brings up another issue. And that's the issue of developing awareness in a person with autism so that they know what their sensory issues are. And actually expanding that as well to being able to understand what sensory challenges exist, what cognitive challenges exist, as well as social and emotional challenges. So what do I mean by that? Let's take, for example, Sam. Sam's working in an office. He does data entry or some sort of filing. He works in an open office. And he does a good job. He really concentrates. He's there every day, on time or early. Hasn't had a sick day yet. His supervisor is impressed with his work. One day, his supervisor comes up to him and says, "You know, Sam, you're doing a really good job. And as a result, I know you don't like this open office. You find it distracting. I'm going to give you this private office over here. Let's go to your office. Let's look at your new office." So they walk. They happily walk into his new office. Now, it turns out Sam has a sensitivity to fluorescent lights. This new office is lit with fluorescent lights. What's going to happen to Sam? How many vote for productivity going this way? How about anxiety going that way? Is it possible, perhaps, that he won't be able to do his job or maybe even have an emotional outburst if the sensory issues become too much? And nobody will understand why that happened. So that's why it's so important to educate Sam and to educate people on the autism spectrum where their challenges are. Now, wouldn't it be great if we could teach Sam to engage in a three-step process of self-advocacy? And those 3 steps begin with Sam being able to say to notice that, oh, that room is lit with fluorescent lights. I don't do well with fluorescent lights. I'm going to have to do something about it. So that's the first step, scanning the environment. I scan the environment wherever I go. So if I go into a restaurant, I scan for noise, I scan for downlights like the ones up here. And I maneuver to a seat where I don't have to sit under one of those blasted lights. If I end up under one of them, well, that brings the second step, which is the advocacy effort. So getting back to Sam, wouldn't it be great if Sam could say, you know, I really appreciate this office, and I appreciate the quietness of the office. You know, I was wondering if we could change the lighting. Maybe use an incandescent lamp. You know what, I could even bring in my own light. Or if a hat is enough for him, I usually don't wear a hat to work, but I think I'm going to have to wear a hat. So there's the advocacy effort. And it's important that the effort be done in a way that the other person can understand and provide assistance. Not having a meltdown, not screaming, not yelling. And that's unfortunately so often what happens. So now that I've told the supervisor that I need a different type of lighting, I have to give him a reason why. And that's the disclosure part. What am I going to tell the supervisor? Am I going to give a full workshop on autism like I'm doing now? Or am I going to use what is known as a limited or partial disclosure and say, these lights give me a headache, I have sensitive eyes, and just be done with it? So that's the 3-step self-advocacy process, which I think is important to teach students on the autism spectrum. So how would Sam know that fluorescent lights don't work for him? Well, that's something that goes back to elementary school education. Every child in special education has some sort of plan, an individual education plan. Let's involve Sam in that education plan so that he can hear the language of advocacy, so that he can hear what is a proper accommodation, so that he can realize, well, he can't expect all the lights to be turned off in the office. but there may be something that he can do that affects him specifically, something that can be changed. Maybe he could even think back to his 3rd grade when he thought, well, gee, I was in part of this meeting. We had this horrible fluorescent light above my head. I couldn't stand it. We had a meeting about it. And I remember we tried a baseball cap, but that didn't really work. So we tried all kinds of things. And then finally I remember when Mr. George got up out of the seat, or I should say got up on top of the desk. He almost fell off. It was pretty funny too. But he unscrewed the light, and that really worked. And he brought in this lamp, an incandescent lamp. So I know that's going to work. So if he could flash back to that experience, then he'd understand. They have a possible solution. So what we have here, and we jumped ahead a little bit. Oh, there we go. So that's just one sensory issue related to the outer senses. How many of you know children having difficulty with haircuts? For me, that was a major problem. And it wasn't the buzzing of the scissors. It wasn't the light touch. But when hair gets cut, each hair gets tugged, one at a time. And some of us feel it more than others. And I didn't have the verbal ability at that time to tell my parents that that's what the problem was. So haircuts were always a problem. As we look at the inner senses, the vestibular sense, those students who are hyposensitive, these are children who seek sensory input. Spinning around in circles, spending all day on a roller coaster if they could. I tend to be hyposensitive. One of my favorite activities would be to ride my bicycle into a snowbank so I could go launching over the handlebars. Proprioception. Deep pressure seems to calm the proprioceptive sense. You see children crawling under mattresses, for example. Weighted vests and blankets seem to help. I'm hyposensitive there too, so I was a sensory-seeking child. Now I'm a sensory-seeking adult. And that's part of the reason that I do workshops and consultations on autism around the world, because the whole thing comes with airplane rides. There's great vestibular and proprioceptive input when an airplane takes off. You know, it gets even better when it goes through bumpy air. Ever look at the wings of a plane when it goes through bumpy air? You know how they flap like this? You know why they do that? It's because the airplane is autistic and it's having a great old time. I don't know why people are turning shades of green, but they do. So those are just some of the sensory issues. This guy, Bart Simpson, he may have some sensory issues and autistic characteristics. And what this slide depicts is the often chaotic nature that many of us with autism perceive the world.